Welcome to Beating Sisyphus, a production of the Cañizares Center for Emerging Markets in collaboration with the Cornell Emerging Markets Institute Club, live from Ithaca, New York. We bring together leaders from across economics, technology, and policy to explore how innovation emerges under pressure. My name is Thomas Riveros, and today we're honored to welcome on the program Lourdes Casanova, my usual co-host, and Anne Miroux. Lourdes is the director of the Cañizares Center for Emerging Markets and a member of the Future Councils of the World Economic Forum. Lourdes is an accomplished business academic, named one of the 30 most influential Ibero-American women intellectuals by Es Global in 2017. Anne Miroux is a faculty fellow at the Cañizares Center and has held positions at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, where she led the FDI statistics and the World Investment Report. She also was the head of the Secretariat of the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development. Lourdes and Anne, it's an honor to have you both on the program today. I'd like to begin, at the beginning for both of you, because we're in this episode hoping to kind of get an understanding of both of your careers and experiences. So starting at the beginning, you both have kind of elite European pedigrees. Anne, you were directing the World Investment Report at the UNCTAD. And Lourdes, of course, you were teaching at INSEAD in France. Now, you both could have easily spent your careers studying the European Union or Wall Street or the United States economy. Instead, you both looked south and east to the messy, volatile, and unpredictable world of emerging markets long before it was, a trendy thing to do. And could you take us back? What was the specific day or specific project that made you realize the center of the world was shifting and that you needed to follow it?
That's a very intriguing question, I would say. The first thing is that if I put myself in the context, I've been working for the United Nations for years, actually, 3 decades. So naturally, I was inclined to look at what was happening in that part of the world that we used to call the third world, which is a completely now word which does not fit any longer. So that was the first thing. And I saw the things changing because I began working in the UN, working actually on multinational cooperation, working on the code of conduct on multinational corporations, which may not ring a bell to you, but was it was a huge project of the UN designed to, reduce the negative effects of multinationals on development and increase the positive effects. So that was this idea that during the 80s, the work on the code basically stopped in the early 90s. And then you had a number of developments in Latin America. You had the debt crisis. So all these changes, but you could see that there was within the developing world a force. That something was changing. And it became very obvious for me in the 90s, late 90s. So I was inclined definitely to work on this topic. My subject of predilection was multinationals. So it's almost natural that I went to study multinationals from emerging economy. And by the way, I just would like to say that the first large report on multinational and FDI from developing economies was published by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in 2006. It was really a kind of, I would say it was a landmark piece. And that's also the time I was beginning to work with Lourdes on multinational from emerging economy. And she wrote also at the landmark publications with multinational. So intellectually, this thing was brewing, I would say.
Amazing. And Lourdes, for yourself, how did you get to this point in 2006 when you started working with Anne? What was the the context for that? What brought you to that point?
Yeah, now we often forget, but Spain, where I was born, was a developing country when I was born. So you had shanty towns, you had a GDP per capita lower than Argentina at that time, and I could see the changes in my own country. When you are born in a Western European country or the US or Canada, a developed country, you tend to forget how hard is to live, to grow up, how many you didn't have the same opportunities. So for me, I was thrilled to see my country of origin, Spain, to grow. That's on the one hand. And at the same time, what I could see is that Spanish companies that were very small and very local were expanding globally and were growing along with the country. So I saw very early on the importance of a vibrant, innovative, committed to the development of the country, private sector, private and state-owned companies as well. So that was my interest. At the same time, you couldn't use the same frameworks that we were teaching in business schools to understand the number one. Often these companies feel a little bit scared to share information. So you had to have some kind of type of report to visit them, to get good relations with them, and then definitely you get the information. And I remember when Anne set up this committee of so-called experts in emerging market multinationals. By the way, emerging market multinationals were out completely of the MBA programs. So then at that time, also the idea was through the experts to learn more about the companies. At the same time, I was in a global school that was INSEAD. Although it was based in France, in the year 2000, they opened another campus in Singapore. So although European, it was the business school was born after the signing of the Treaty of Rome and the embryonic situation of the European Union, the perspective was global. And one more factor that was very important is that in INSEAD, executive education was very important. And me, as a woman, I was the first one to direct executive education programs, and I realized that my expertise was emerging market multinationals. So very soon, I started working with them in that way to learn from them, to find out how their competitive advantages were different, their international projects were different. They wanted to expand sometimes to reduce risk because their own situation in their home countries was riskier. So that's how I started, a combination of timing, and as Anne said, the situation of emerging markets has completely changed, mainly starting in the year 2000. And since then, of course, my knowledge and was becoming more important. So what happens with these countries and what happens with the business sector of those countries?
That was fascinating to see. I mean, from your perspective, Lourdes, getting to actually experience that development firsthand, and then of course your perspective and being able to see all these incredible developments going on, and really the changing world that we saw in the 80s, and the large and very fast development that we saw later on in the 90s. And as a follow up to that, looking back on both of your collaboration. Could you identify a few moments where you've seen the other's background or academic, whether it be academic or in terms of policy, kind of pushing you to think, something that you wouldn't have gotten to on your own? Like, how do you both, are able to work so well together and complement each other in that fashion?
Actually, our careers were, I wouldn't say intertwined, but okay, so Anne mentioned when she launched this group of experts in emerging market multinationals, but then again, we were both invited to be members of the Global Agenda Councils of the World Economic Forum at the same time. So we kept meeting each other.
Yeah.
And they came when Anne decided to take early retirement from the United Nations. And then I thought it was definitely, we could build so much based on the collaboration that we had over the years. So by the time, probably we had been collaborating maybe 10 to 15 years. And for me, Anne always brings the perspective of the policy side, because as part of the United Nations, had worked a lot also with the governments directly, while for me it was more bottom up. So how companies are different and very minutious kind of work into understanding how companies in emerging markets work. So I think that way, Anne?
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a complementarity because Lourdes has really a very strong business background, hands-on, talking to company. You have that kind of feeling, very concrete. So I think you better understand what the business challenges are. And I had more of a macroeconomic, perhaps more theoretical, and definitely policy-oriented. And I must say that we began looking at most of the development in emerging multinational increasingly through a political angle, and even nowadays through a geopolitical angle. And we began doing that, I would say, really, especially with the books that we published on the Chinese multinational. So it was a complementarity, because I think you need all the facets to really understand what's going on.
Mm.
And as we were discussing before, you can look at emerging markets from 3 perspectives. One, as a financial investor, meaning that you try to assess the risk and then you buy either sovereign debt or you buy into the stock markets or Forex. That's one perspective. And there is a lot of work done into that field because right now there are billions of dollars of different funds that are concentrating on emerging markets. Also mainly because the dollar fell down about 15% in 2025. We thought that is done. Second perspective is the development perspective. So what type of policies, what type of macro policies are best for emerging markets? Sometimes we feel that there is a little bit of a paternalistic view. We have done well and we'll tell emerging markets what to do. Again, covered so many great economists have done great work. And the third one is to kind of go into a discovery trip on how emerging markets are changing, and that relates to the findings of the last 3 years. This is a reflection that we started in the Emerging Market Multinationals report 3 years ago, where we started looking how emerging markets had done, and they had done in general extremely well, both in social, macro variables, poverty reduction, reduction of infant mortality, growth, GDP per capita growth. So we found 3 factors. One, the rise of China that has pulled many other emerging markets, technology, the smartphones, and of course, having coverage of internet everywhere in the planet practically. And third, the South-South relations that had become much more established, and South-South trade. So we believe that, so that's the perspective that we are taking, trying to uncover from the emerging markets perspective what is happening, what innovation, what we can learn, and that is, and of course, the business sector.
Mm. Yeah, certainly incredible amount of research and just such a amazing collaboration to see, amazing team to see, both of you working together in that sense. I think it very inspirational for us who are younger and thinking about our careers in terms of how we're going to partner with other people to really make big change. So I want to go back, like you guys meet and make sure I have it straight, and you meet in 2006 working on this multinationals report together. And your paths kind of keep converging, both end up working together with the World Economic Forum. So after this 2006 multinationals report, how does your partnership continue to evolve over the years, and what kind of has brought you to where you are both today, both working at the Cañizares Center? And could we start with you?
How could I say? Well, life is a suite of a series of events, I would say. So we continued after the report was published in 2006, and I wrote an article with a colleague of mine in 2007, and it was always on the back burner. And we popped in each other in World Economic Forum meetings and so on. And then I left the UN in 2015, but already a couple of years before Lourdes, reached out, and I knew that, and when he suggested that I joined, then I was absolutely delighted, and I brought with me what I had, which is my knowledge of FDI, my understanding, and I must say humble, and I must be humble, because we may come to that later. Looking at an emerging market multinational has a lot of sort of theoretical implication, but then Lourdes, as I said, was at the time heading the Emerging Market Institute, later to become the Cañizares Center of Emerging Markets. So it was a kind of, events, a series, and a mutual inclination in terms of the topic, and working well together. that brought us together, and it has been a fantastic, actually, adventure, I would say, more than 10 years.
Oh, that's lovely. And Lourdes, your perspective.
And also, careers evolve because the interest of the public and the importance in the world has changed. So emerging markets are not anymore the periphery, but are at the core. We have China as the second biggest economy in the world. Again, a very important question: is China an emerging market still or not anymore? And India becoming between number 3 and number 5 economy in the world. So this is not more the periphery, but the core. So from the moment that the now Cañizares Center was launched in 2010 till now, so the idea of launching this center was, as it happens in many universities in the US, is that a couple of alumni said the world is changing and we need to bring more international content and get to know more emerging markets. So that was 2010. So the moment that was launched, and of course, both founding directors, Yaru Chen and current dean of the business school, Andrew Caroli. So both great experts, both great leaders, and they took the project with so much enthusiasm. These projects, these are startups, so you have to make sure that the startups grow. And then when I took over and started collaborating with Anne, the emerging markets were flourishing. So then the institute has flourished, again, not only because of us, because of students like you, Thomas, and so many other students that enthusiastically has put a lot of their volunteering time into the project. And of course, the advisory council and the faculty council who support us financially and also with plenty of ideas, because we have evolved into bringing so much content in again. So then the thing is both, is that, as they say many times, we were at the right time, at the right place, because of the interest in emerging markets that is now so big. Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear that you both managed to come together at this pivotal moment that we see in emerging markets, where it's no longer just the periphery, but now the core, as you mentioned, and these economies are becoming so important, China and India and so many other emerging markets, that it's becoming very much impossible for people to ignore or to look past. So that's really incredible. I was wondering, Lourdes, one of the things that Anne pointed out was kind of your concrete business background. Could you take us, maybe to a story, like an experience that you've had, either talking with policymakers or talking with business people, where you think that ability has really aided you, or where do you think that has kind of come from? Where's it spread out from?
So as I said, in my previous institution, I did a lot of executive education. So for executive education, you are in a remote place, often with 50 executives. Again, I can mention Cemex, I can mention SMEs from Brazil, I can mention Telefónica, BBVA. Now they are multinationals on their own right, but at that time we're starting to expand, we're starting to become big companies. So over there, you learn a lot, and you learn, as I told you before, this anthropological approach. Had these companies a competitive advantage? I'm not sure. The competitive advantage was being created as they were growing, as they were going international, as they were learning in the internationalization process. So I think all of us business education faculty need to be closer to the companies, to live and to learn from the realities of companies. Not, of course, if you talk about the Googles, the Amazons, the Metas, the Microsofts of these worlds, these are created, they were born already in Silicon Valley, a place for innovation, a mythical place for innovation, and with so much access to finances, to capital. I wouldn't say their growth was easier, but definitely companies like Petrobras, again, a huge oil company from Brazil. They were called at some point one of the new Seven Sisters, of oil companies. How this company grew. This company is state-owned, so very committed to the development of Brazil. Is different than what you expect from a Chevron, from an ExxonMobil. That is completely different. Again, access to capital, access to knowledge, access to renewing themselves. America Mobile of Mexico, and they completely different, and they have to always have. So we always teach in business schools, maximize the willingness to pay of the customer. You cannot do that in Bolivia or in Vietnam because the GDP per capita is much, much lower. So a real competitive advantage is that the products they sell are consistently cheaper. Not because it's a strategy, it's because they have no choice. So they have to make sure that to cut costs, to adjust to their own most important customer base. So again, you have to face these companies sometimes with humility, if you may want to say this word, in the sense that are very innovative, very technology aware, they renew themselves constantly, but for another context. And we have to learn from them because now they are everywhere. And at the same time, view them in a different way.
Yeah, one word that just stuck out to me as you were saying that, talking about these strategies that these companies are employing, is humility. And I know Anne actually just mentioned that a few minutes ago. And I wanted to ask you, how do you think humility has played a role in your career and in your research in general? How has it kind of allowed you to better further that research?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to always come. I mean, it's perhaps humility. I don't know whether it's the proper word. Is that basically you come up with an open mind and you don't believe that you know it all. And actually, you learn that very early in your career from some of the mistakes that you may be doing. And it's also very, very important. And again, I think it's working with people from what we used to call developing countries, because even, it's another issue, but how to, even giving a label or trying to give a category, developing, emerging, and so on, itself is already an issue. But anyway, coming from a background, working with the UN, very, very closely from people, policymakers from developing countries, you understand that you do not have actually all the answers, or the answers that you have are for a particular situation. And I think it's very, very important to do that, including when you do research, because as Lourdes says, we had a mindset. I also did a business school in France, and you have a mindset and principle, if you want, that you thought were universal, but actually they are not. And I think this way of approaching it, I felt it very, very early, but nowadays it's something that you see, because those who used to be the dominating powers, they see themselves very much challenged on the economic and political side, and actually on the scientific side. So in a way, you have been led to that by the events, but that's something that I felt very, very early in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think humility is such an important characteristic in just every aspect of life, and particularly in economic research, where findings from papers can certainly reverse as soon as the next one comes out, or be contradicted by other ones. So I think when it comes to policy making and things like that, humility is just so crucial. I'd like to give two numbers and a quotation. So in 1999, China and other emerging markets had just 6 of the Fortune 500 companies together, if you combine their total companies. Now today, China has 133, and other emerging markets have 32. Another statistic, in 2000, 85% of inward FDI flows went to developed countries, and less than 10% went to the E20+1, which is the largest or most important emerging markets that the Cañizares Center ranks. And now today, that E20+1 receives 30% of flows, and the developed countries about 40%. And in his book, I Goldman Sachs, I believe, finance guy, investor, and I believe very, very well-respected business academic and intellectual, Bashir Sharama, in his book called Breakout Nations, says the unthinking faith in the hot growth stories of the last decade also ignores the high odds against success. And so with these two statistics in the quote kind of contradicting or like contrasting each other, we see this picture of very large, almost unstoppable growth in emerging market economies. But we also see the need to have caution when it comes to thinking about, say, the inevitability of those. And I'd like to hear both of your perspectives. Do you think that the development and the growth of these emerging market economies is something that in the long arc of history is almost an inevitability as we continue to expand, as we continue to change as a globe, these emerging market economies will continue to be lifted out? Or do you think it really matters much more kind of the exact policies that each of these economies are taking on? Lourdes, can we start with you?
Okay, two different questions. The first one, you said, why the growth of Chinese companies? So what we say in the report in a book that we published on the rise of Chinese multinationals, what we say is that let's don't forget that the companies have grown in China because the country has grown a lot. So that's the first thing. So if you look at a bank, ICBC, one of the biggest banks in the world by assets, not by market cap, but by assets. So they are in about 45 to 50 countries, but most of their revenues come from China, only 10% from outside. So we used to have the director of USA for this bank in the EMI conference, and often he would say, you know what, not worth it. It's a pain to be in 50 countries and only get 10% of the revenues. But we have to be there because we need to learn. So let's remember, first thing is that Chinese companies have grown mainly because the growth of their domestic market. Second, as we said before, all emerging markets have had a golden era in the last 25 years. We were looking back in history, and actually, if we look between 1800 and 2000, except for Latin America, the rest of emerging markets have not done well at all. But the things have changed in the late 90s and after the year 2000. Will this be forever? Life is unfair. And you, Thomas, are leading the Beating Sisyphus webinars. And in Beating Sisyphus, so you push when you are at the bottom, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to push, and then again you go down. Motivation of the people, motivation to continue sacrificing for the good of the country. It's difficult to get your own people motivated. I would say now many emerging markets have become middle economies. Again, an example, Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, middle income, Thailand, Malaysia, almost there. Will the stone of Sisyphus fall again? Hopefully not. But definitely we are in the middle, and you still need to tell your population we still need to continue pushing the stone to reach a moment, I would say, like Southern European countries. I mentioned Spain, but could have been Italy, Greece. Of course, Korea, the Republic of Korea, has been a tremendous success. But again, going back, Malaysia, Chile, and others that have done so well. And you reach a point in which falling is you are more stable over there. And many emerging markets are still, the World Bank is about to classify China as a high-income country. So once you are classified as high income, the chances of you to stay there are higher. I am now in India. I've been visiting India for the last 2.5 weeks, and definitely you can feel the strength, the motivation, the willingness to say, okay, this is our time. We'll reach soon there. So that's an incredible moment, and hopefully, many of the countries that are up will stay there.
Certainly. And Anne, your perspective, is it an inevitability, or do we all, need to each country keep pushing its own respective boulder?
Perhaps inevitability is a little strong, but I would say there is no going back overall. Because I mean, many countries have already reached a level where basically they are at the middle of the road. Yes, they may go back, but back to what they were 20 years ago. I, I, I mean, for me, it's difficult to envisage. It does not mean that there will not be ups and downs, but overall, I'm still kind of optimistic in a way. Or my point is that there is no going back. You have a group of countries that were not playing a key role, or were not geopolitically even significant, but now definitely they are. So I think we have to see that in perspective. And there are two aspects I like to highlight. The first one is the demography, which in my view makes a huge difference. And also a link to demography, perhaps the possibility to access skills or knowledge more easily nowadays than before. And that changes completely the equation. And, innovation is already something in many emerging economies. And if the trend continue with easier access to knowledge, education, and so on, I do believe that the human capital, that was a very, very weak point in many countries, used to be called developing countries. That part of the equation is that parameter is improved. That's why I am confident in a way. Of course, putting aside a number of geopolitical events on which, of course, nobody has any control.
Let me add that we are working with a group of students at Cornell and a colleague, an alum from Hong Kong. We are working on a project of the use of AI, of artificial intelligence, by SMEs in Southeast Asia. And one tremendous surprise has been, Southeast Asia, and also we are looking at China and India. One tremendous surprise has been, the strength by which governments, like Vietnam again, I mentioned Vietnam before, wants to not to miss the train this time. So they have policies that go from training, infrastructure, and guess what? India wants to be present in the whole ecosystem. They have developed their own LLM, again, pushing infrastructure, energy, the database, data centers, etc. Of course, India is well known because they have such a massive, excellent group of engineers from IITs and from other universities. So the willingness, as Anne was saying, of saying this time we will not miss the boat. And if we were discussing this 2 years ago, and the question was, will AI increase or the digital divide? And the answer was a clear yes. Now I'm not sure, because as Anne was saying, countries are determined this time we will use AI for our favor. And of course, you need all the data from emerging markets because of demography, as Anne said.
Excellent. Yeah. So there is this active element that is going on in these countries where the populaces are realizing that we need to adopt technology. We need to adopt better education systems. And with that, we have almost, it's still pushing the boulder up, but it's a mountain kind of that has plateaus, and there's different levels, and you can certainly come crashing down. But once you hit one of the terraced areas, one of the plateaus, you can kind of reset. And from that point, at least from what I'm getting from Anne and Lourdes, both of your perspectives, it seems like certainly there's a lot of active influence that needs to go on in these economies, and decision making, and really good leadership. But at the same time, there is certainly kind of a backstop that they've been able to build up through improved technology, through improved human capital, and all of those different things. So it's certainly a heartening thing to hear, and we certainly can hope that for the continuing future, these economies will continue to grow and develop. I want to take you both back again to your college days. And I would like to hear if there was something, if you could slip a single piece of paper to that person that you were at that time, what would you tell yourself? And why would you write that?
Okay, open up to different perspectives, open up to critical thinking, open up to the world, because definitely Europe and US, we continue to be leaders in economic and business, but the world has changed tremendously in an unexpected way. We were not expecting that at that time. At that time was the miracle of Japan that was growing tremendously. China was nowhere to be seen. So open up to different perspectives. We tend to, academics are very, very conservative. And we still teach in our classes the Amazons of this world and the Googles of this world. Why? Because or Apple or these traditional, very innovative companies. But why? Because we know a lot from these companies. We don't want the students to challenge our knowledge. And I would say we all have to learn to challenge our beliefs and our way of thinking about the world, because, and needless to say, technology. Who would have thought that we could use ChatGPT for our work? ChatGPT AI is going to revolutionize completely the way we write. And we just spoke about that with you, Thomas, that we want to rethink the emerging market multinationals report, because in the view of the different technological changes and world changes, geographic changes, we need to rethink how we view, how we cover the report, which means we use of communication, again, video becoming so important in the printed word that was key for 500 years is moving backwards. We need more graphics, more visualization of what we are talking, and again, the written word. So we have 150 pages, 200 pages report. This is probably one thing of the past.
So if you want me to answer, Thomas,
Yeah, that'd be
I would
great.
say
Yes, please. Be bold.
be bold. Be bold. And actually goes very much along what Lourdes says, is that be bold, meaning basically when you don't agree, say it. If there are, uncharted territories and you are threatening, go for it. Open up. Sometimes I won't use the word my generation. It's something that we were not used to challenge what the teacher was saying, especially being a woman, to tell you the truth. It was quite tough. So I would say to any younger students, be bold. Have a critical mind, definitely. Don't take for granted what is given to you, especially nowadays. And so I think that this be bold and encapsulate all that, open up, go into things that you think are important, even if others disagree, it does not matter. It's like, so that means you have to be a little bit courageous, I agree, but after all, that's why you are young. I mean, take it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I love it. No, I think being bold is certainly, very, very critical, and especially in this world today, as Lourdes was just mentioning, like the changing, even the mediums that we're communicating with each other. It's important that we can boldly step out into using those and trying to use those to, ultimately, express our ideas, express differences in a respectful manner, in a way that everyone can learn from that. And I think that's absolutely critical. And so very glad to hear, such excellent wisdom from the both of you on that front.
No, and one more thing, business education has to completely transform itself. We have the responsibility to push the borders of business education, again, technology, geographies that are completely different. We have to be bold in that sense. And we focus a lot we do a PhD research day to both encourage PhD students to geographically look at other universes, at other units of business, at other organizations and learn from them. So definitely business education has to change because of the geopolitical changes, because the economic models that are completely being transformed, with a much more importance of the state all over in technology. AI is here to stay and is going to shake up academics, is going to shake up journals, publications, is going to shake us, as we said before, the way we communicate what we are researching and the way we do research, of course.
Absolutely. So we got to be bold and adaptive at the same time. I love it. All right. So kind of on that note, when you have both traveled around the world extensively and been able to visit some incredible emerging market economies, and I think a lot of the time, what these economies are able to do to promote growth is to be bold and step out in new policies, step out in new industries, new areas. And I'd like to hear from your travels, what's one emerging market economy that you visited that you were really very struck by, very impressed by, that your thoughts beforehand, about that, your preconceived notions about it were kind of completely shattered the moment you stepped off the plane. We can start with you, Anne.
This is a very issue. As long as you have not been to China, it's difficult to realize, for instance, what's going on. So definitely, that was an example from an economic point of view, but from also a societal point of view. And that, I think, did struck me tremendously. And made me uncomfortable by some aspect and very admiring by others. So that's how I felt. Otherwise, no, I don't. No country really comes immediately to my mind, because in my career, each country comes with a particular issue that I had to deal with. That's really more the way I was approaching them.
Oh, okay, I understand. And so, yeah, absolutely. On the visit to China, because I think that's very, very, very relevant. A lot of people haven't actually ever been there. I haven't been there myself. Um, was there, one moment on that trip that kind of really changed your mind? Maybe it was seeing kind of the growth and seeing like the new buildings that were going on, or maybe in your conversations with the people there.
One of the things which did strike me is when I took the train
Mm.
from Xinjiang to Shanghai, and there was a huge train station, fully automated, hardly any train official. So that was, you would not buy your ticket at the counter, or perhaps there was one ticket counter somewhere. It was so big I could not see it. And it was very intimidating at the same time. That was the entrance. And then you enter in another place where people are waiting for the train. And then you have crowds of crowds of crowds. So that kind of, it was kind of, it looked futuristic, very difficult for me to comprehend actually what was going on. But the train system definitely amazed me. And also because it was a high-speed train, so you could see the speed of the train going as fast as those I am used to in Europe. But that was kind of, and very well kept and so on. So you had this thing between a train station where you don't see anybody. There is absolutely no human being to provide the service. Then you enter in the place where you wait, and then you have crowds of people. So presumably everything is done online. And then you have to enter the train, and then you go through some kind of security check that are a little bit intimidating. So all that gives you an idea of what perhaps the society could be in 5 years from now. I don't know. So that
Yeah.
did strike me.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think that perspective is very valuable. It's always amazing to see those very large changes, very, very different from what we're used to. In my case, in the U.S. and in both of your cases coming from Europe. And how about for you, Lourdes?
Actually, I wanted to mention Brasilia. I love Brazil, and Brasilia was amazing, a futuristic city designed by this tremendous architect that is Oscar Niemeyer, and how the city was also able to combine. You have the areas next to the lake that both welfare in a very broad sense of the word, and also the design of the whole city was amazing. And we have this idea. You have similar projects in Jakarta, so now you have many next to Cairo, many different cities that are being designed, because the idea is that the current capital is too overcrowded, and you design that. So you have everywhere in emerging markets this thing. And the last country I wanted to mention, because we both have spoken very positively about emerging markets. So this is a wish. And my wish is for Madagascar, a beautiful island, 4 times the size of France, and that today has lower GDP per capita, today 2026, than the year of the independence from France, that I'm saying out of memory, that I think it was in the 50s. So one of the few countries in the world that has lost. So the big is still, so Sisyphus still has to start from the very beginning to push the
boulder.
yeah. So hopefully this is my wish, that again this beautiful country that is Madagascar is able to reduce the extreme poverty that breaks your heart when you are in Antananarivo or in other cities, and at the same time has beautiful touristic resorts, and at the same time plenty of natural resources. So we hope that the natural resources of Madagascar help the island move to the next phase and enjoy next 25 years a tremendous transformation.
Yeah. I think those experiences that we've all gotten to have in emerging markets is just so powerful and such an amazing reminder of the importance of why we are doing this research that we do at the Cañizares Center. At the end of the day, we're ultimately, trying to do our best to explore, economics and policy and business and finance and all these areas, with the ultimate goal of being able to promote that development, promote conversations about development. And so I think, just from my perspective, having been able to go and visit, Latin American countries, it's always, very stark, like you mentioned, Lourdes. Like there's so many incredible natural wonders to visit, natural things to visit, and even incredible areas and cities that are highly developed in certain parts. But at the same time, there's always that element of poverty that still exists and still is often so persistent. So certainly our best efforts that we can do in order to promote development, promote growth, and opportunities for these regions is why I think the work that we do at the Cañizares Center is so important. And well, with that, I'd like to thank you both so much for the time taken out of your schedules to just give this master class in a sense on both of your careers. And I know this has been of great use to me, getting to hear both of kind of your perspectives throughout your careers and experiences. And also, I'm sure will be of great value to the listeners. So for the Cañizares Center for Emerging Markets, along with the Cornell Emerging Markets Institute Club, this is Beating Sisyphus.